Witnesses on the scene reported the sound of shots being fired. Despite security being reportedly active in the area since the 4th hour of the day, and even the military seemingly being activated, no official statement on the situation has yet been released. However, any attempts at communication with people within the supervision of the gravitational spin so far have been unsuccessful. Meanwhile, highly sensitive measurements are reporting a drop in gravitational force of 0.23%. Whether this is connected to the strange occurrences in gravity control is yet to be determined. However, the lack of any official declarations by the station's administration does raise questions. We will remain on the scene and update you on any changes in the situation. This has been Deutschny for 10 to 10 News. Now back to the studio. The broadcast was sent across the entire station. While many disregarded it with a concerned look or a dismissive grunt, it was able to cause quite the stir among certain individuals that were following the news with anxiety, only waiting for something out of the ordinary to happen. Confined to their current positions by his own orders, James's friends could do little but watch things unfold, and hope that he was not involved, as the news crews filmed from far away as well-equipped security forces surrounded the station's gravity control. But after knowing James for a while now, they all had sincere doubts that this happening shortly after he had sent his message of keeping a low profile was a mere coincidence. And soon, inactivity and anxiety were starting to take a toll of them, as the situation seemed to become more and more dire by the moment. However, on the other side of the conflict, there were also those that watched things unfold with a rising feeling of anxiety, as not all of them were comfortable with the turn things had taken by now. One of them especially looked upon the show of force with great dismay, and immediately started to make his way towards administration, determined to let reason prevail. Had it not been for their night vision gear, the hallway would have laid in complete darkness, allowing none of them to see even a finger's width in front of their face. But now, the security saw everything around them as blue-tinted shapes and forms. Off in the distance, the main control room, the presumed location of their targets, could be seen as nothing but a blinding white light, messing with the NVGs, and allowing them no insight. Somehow, using whatever they had available, their targets had managed to light up the room they had holed up in, negating the main advantage that cutting the power had given the team. The security chief looked over his team of 12, including himself. The heavily geared personnel had coordinatedly taken position at the large bend in the corridor before arriving at their target's supposed position. The tension in the air was palpable, as every one of his subordinates felt the burden of responsibility weighing them down. Despite their faces being obscured by their NVGs, he could imagine the grimaces of their faces as they thought about this mission risking not only their own lives, but also those of the hostages that this supposed terrorist had taken. Since the earlier shots had rung out, the sound in the halls had mostly died down again, leaving them in near complete silence as they crossed the building in pursuit of the targets. However, now, being in almost direct proximity, a single ongoing sound broke the silence. A constant stream of words, muttered in a language that Chief didn't understand, yet he recognized their meaning nonetheless. It was a desperate prayer, spoken in what must have been the darkest time of somebody's life. It bounced off the empty walls and was carried all the way to their ears. The Chief didn't know if the plea reached whatever deity it was addressed towards. All he knew is that it reached him and his team, and that would be on them to make the hope it carried a reality. On his deepest level, his heart even thanked the captors of that poor soul, thanked them for not silencing that last grasp onto hope. We've located the targets. As expected, they're hauled up with the hostages in the central control room. We're pushing forward. The Chief gave his status update to Mission Command. Understood. The melodica's voice of Warrant Officer Hyferty of the Communal Military, who had been given the role of operator in this mission, answered calmly. But proceed with caution. Remember that the culprits are armed and most likely dangerous. The safety of the hostages is the top priority, so lethal fire is not permitted. A few steps away, further out of the perception of their targets, the Chief could hear 4 members of his team struggle with loading some of the heavy gear they had gotten equipped with for this mission. The sound of heavy metal cartridges being moved, their surfaces grating against each other, and just as heavy mechanisms locking and securing them into place filled the air for a moment. Hey, Chief, are we sure this stuff's gonna work? One of the bigger of the 4 asked his boss, looking down at the cumbersome equipment. His speech was rough and his voice was muffled by the mask he wore to protect his face and lungs. Thought fucker's supposed to be damn tough. Well, this time put him down. Having apparently listened in, the operator decided to take over answering for the Chief. You'd better be careful. Those cartridges are filled with nitrous oxide. Human physicians have been using this gas as a sedative for hundreds of years. If anyone knows what will put a human down, it should be them. There is a reason you all are being so heavily equipped. Usually this mixture would be considered too strong for use on civilians. However, I think you would agree that the circumstances are rather extenuating.
You heard the lady. Don't mess around with the stuff and get this over with quickly, the chief reinforced, looking at his team strictly despite his own face being just as obscured as theirs were. He then turned to the rest of his team, and they didn't need to wait for him to say anything to start and ready the rest of their equipment. They had been warned that the less lethal stopping weapons they were carrying would be a good bit less effective against the human. Most of them will do little more than slow him down, unless they manage to hit him with multiple weapons at the same time. However, some of them were more effective than others, and at least the chemical weapons would hopefully be effective at slowing him down enough for the gas to do its work. In a routine fashion, they started to form up, building two orderly lines while stacking up with each other, leaving enough space between them for their 4 missing members to take position and deploy the cartridges. The chief of course took the lead, the eyes of his team surely remaining focused on him. He switched over to non-verbal communication. With some quick movements of his arm, he indicated for everyone to be prepared. Then, he allowed himself a last moment of calm, breathing in and out. He almost wished that he could take off his mask and breathe more clearly, although he of course knew better than that. Then, having cleared his mind and hopefully given his team enough time to do the same, he raised his hand to give the signal. They had to move fast. Hefting the heavy launchers to the corners, his subordinates quickly took aim at the single speck of blinding light. It didn't take long for them to give an indication that they were ready to fire, only waiting for the go-ahead. The chief nodded and brought his gaze forward. He really wished that he could see more than a blinding flare of light through the MVG, but he would have to live with it. Reaching out his grasper, he made a sharp gesture forward. With a considerable sound echoing back from the barren walls, the launchers fired, sending the heavy gas cartridges flying along the corridor. They impacted the metal floor, the sound reverberating through the halls, followed by the hissing sound of them releasing their payload throughout the room. The soft, desperate prayer was interrupted, and quickly got replaced by fearful outcries from the hostages. Using this as their starting gun, the team of professionals immediately began their push forward, almost shoving themselves into the empty corridor while remaining stacked up and always pointing their weapons in the direction of potential targets. They were ready to halt any attempt at escape. They also had to be ready for the hostages to possibly run out in a panic, should the targets try to use that as a distraction, or plainly use control over their leverage. However, apparently those two held enough of a presence that the protests of their hostages remained at an outcry. Even the outcry soon died down, and it got quiet. Really quiet. "Careful," one of the more attentive team members yelled out, giving everyone just enough time to notice a large object flying out of the bright ball of light that was the room's door. Seeing that it wasn't alive, they couldn't afford more than a passing glance at the thing while pressing forward, as it impacted the floor with a deafening bang, and started to loudly roll along the floor. "They just threw it back," was all the chief could unbelievably think, as he watched the metal gas cartridge roll away from him and his team, as they further pushed forward. By now, they had to deactivate their NVGs, as the light filling the room and blinding turned into too much of a detriment to their vision, while they were close enough to the source of the light that it would reveal them to possible attackers. Better to have the same limited vision as your enemy, than to see less than them. They breached the threshold of the door, the first thing they saw being the hostages. At a glance it was clear that some were already slowly succumbing to the effects of the gas, many of them barely able to keep to their feet anymore, while others seemed not at all affected yet. That, however, didn't deter from the sheer terror on their faces, as none of them could know what was happening to any of them. "Down to the ground!" the chief and multiple of his team ordered, as they formed up in the room, ready to meet any form of resistance, any aggression, any charge or any gun raised in their direction with an overwhelming amount of force, and get your appendages where we can see them. Maybe none of the weapons they held were supposed to be deadly, however they had a lot of them, and not even a raging beast would be able to withstand their combined efforts, so a person stood no chance. Only peripherally, the team noticed the hostages, at least those who could still reason, comply with their demands. The same way, they now also knew where the light came from despite the blackout. Assistants. All around, personal assistants were propped up, either laying on the ground or placed on any flat surface, pointing their integrated lights into the room, illuminating their surroundings. Altogether, they actually lit up everything decently well. It had certainly been enough to mess with their gear and take away their main advantage, if only for a moment. Having not immediately located the targets, the chief made another split-second decision. "Kill the lights," he ordered, determined to get his planned advantage back. "And get your NVGs back on as soon as you do. Everyone else, cover them." 4 members pulled out their ballistics and got to work quickly dispatching one of the gadgets after another, shooting them in order to not break formation
while the rest of the team kept vigilant watch to not be surprised by any possible developments. Soon, the room was drowned in darkness once again, as it was supposed to be from the start, and quickly they had their vision advantage back. They still saw clear as day, but surely their targets were left in the dark. Now they just had to make them out. They should be able to quickly subdue them, as soon as they would find them. There was a good possibility the targets would be hiding amongst the hostages. Given that they now had the cover of the night once more, the chief returned to using non-verbal commands. He split his team into 3 smaller teams of 4. One, designated Team 1, was to guard the door and make sure no one would plot an escape, as well as provide cover to the remaining teams. The other 2 were to start clearing the room in search of the targets, Team 2 searching the open side of the room, while Team 3 checked the hostages. Slowly and methodically, the teams began to make their way through the dark room, always making sure to check every nook and cranny before continuing on their way, before declaring a position to be clear, determined to not miss a speck of dust in their search. The chief took point in searching the hostages, inspecting each body laying on the floor intently. In the meantime, many more had succumbed to the gas, and only a few still managed to keep their eyes open or their hands in the air, although some few of them seemed like the gas was not even bothering them. Differences in biology, no doubt. Suddenly, the chief was quite glad to have gotten the reassurance that the gas would work on the targets beforehand. Right on cue, as he was thinking of them, the first of the targets was discovered. A short bit away from the main bulk of the hostages and sprawled out on the floor lay the Turnip. The giant's plated chest softly rose and sank with each slow, soft breath, and the muscular limbs seemed to have absolutely no tension left in them. Even the hand holding his pilfered gun had loosened while holding it and lay flat, pressing the weapon to the floor. It seemed that the gas had done wonders on him. Of course, that wasn't enough for them, as they couldn't be sure he wasn't just pretending. Remaining extremely wary of the massive jaws and powerful maulers of the Predator, Team 3 slowly approached the sleeping giant, their weapons trained on him at all times. First order of action would be to remove the firearm before restraining and securing the alleged terrorist. While the Chief and Team 3 were busy with that one, and Team 2 was still in the process of sneaking through the vaster part of the room, Team 1 could only watch them, trying to remain ready for any eventualities that may come up. The temporarily appointed team leader was mostly focused on keeping an eye on the Chief, as the procedure of taking the Turnip into custody seemed to be a quite delicate one, and he wanted to be ready to raise his weapon and step in at a moment's notice. His team, however, seemed to have different ideas, everyone seemingly having differently weighted priorities in their current situation. One of their random notions finally came through to him, however, as it seemed that one of his mates had a sudden revelation. 1, 2, and 3 in the hall. No, wait. No, don't wait. 1, 2, 3 in the hall. Yeah, I'm right, she mumbled to herself, and the team leader turned to her for a moment, trying to figure out what she was on about, before soon realizing it himself. One's missing. His eyes shot forward. 4 cartridges. One got thrown into the corridor. One lay little way off from the hostages and Team 3's current position. The third one had rolled pretty much into the middle of the room before losing its momentum. But where was the 4th? He couldn't see it anywhere. This was probably something he should bring to everyone's attention, so he reached up to quietly relay the message for his communicator. All teams be advised. One of the nitrous oxide cartridges is currently missing from the premises. I repeat, one of the nitrous oxide cartridges is currently missing from the premises. Watch out for it and remain vigilant. The message from Team 1's leader came over the comm line. Copy that, Team 2's leader replied quickly, trying to not let the sudden intrusion distract her from the task at hand. She had momentarily lifted her hand, indicating for her team to hold while they received the message. Now she lowered it again and instead gave 2 quick waves, indicating to continue the search. As they turned every corner, the weapons drawn, and cleared every spot, the second team leader's ears whirred in excitement, drowning out the noises of her team's footsteps or her own breathing. This was even more exacerbated by the mask, pressing down on her face and ears and slightly muffling the world around her. She was completely concentrated on her task, in her own way. However, it turned out that the same was true for her team, but in a slightly different way. Can we pause for a moment, ma'am? One of them asked suddenly, breaking the monotonous humming in her ear. The team leader once again gave the signal to pause. Once everyone had come to a stop, she asked, What is it? Nothing, Do you hear that? Her teammate asked, uncertainly. The question made the entire team fall silent. Some of them seemingly even held their breath, trying to make out whatever their colleague was talking about. The team leader also strained her ears. What was he on about? There was nothing to be heard. Or was there? Faint. Very faint. She believed she started to actually make something out.
and she really hoped it wasn't just her stressed mind playing tricks on her, because she expected to hear something. It sounded strange. The closest thing she could come up with was someone trying to suppress a sneeze, but not just once, but constantly. Violent breaths being barely held in, with a little bit of air escaping every now and again, making the distinct noise of pressure releasing. And it came from not too far away. "I don't hear anything," the team leader said out loud. However, at the same time she indicated for her team to remain quiet and follow her. Whoever that was, she didn't want to give them a heads up as the team neared her position. Remaining as methodical as they could, they slowly worked their way over towards the source of the noises. The team leader could feel her heart pumping all the way up into her head, and she couldn't imagine that it was much different for her team. Whoever it was, they seemed to have extreme problems keeping their breathing under control. Could that be because of the gas? But wasn't that supposed to knock people out? The blue hue the NVGs tinted the world in ever present, the room slowly moved by with each tentative step. Most things they saw were the rigs with attached screens the employees would usually do their work at, obscuring their vision in regular intervals. They couldn't get careless, and had to work their way past each one of them guardedly, as they couldn't be sure their second target wasn't hiding anywhere, waiting to ambush them while they investigated the strange noise. But nothing turned up, even as they got nearly within spitting distance of their momentary goal. The closer she got, the more Team 2's leader felt like something about that sound just wasn't right, however she couldn't quite put the finger on it. Looking at her team, she made sure everybody was on the same page. Whatever was making that sound, it had to be behind the next rig and screen. They formed up around, and with a single move of the leader's hand, they engaged. However, rounding the corner there was nothing. Nothing in sight. There weren't many places to hide, and her entire team couldn't possibly have missed one. As they convened in the place that had to be the origin of the strange noise, all the team leader could think was, what the hell? The place was empty, but the noise hadn't gone silent. It had clearly come from somewhere around here, but somehow it still sounded like it was a bit away. If only this damn mask hadn't been, maybe she would have been able to more clearly follow the sound. However, in this current situation, she couldn't even think about taking it off. "What now?" one of her teammates asked, looking around, apparently trying to make sure he hadn't missed anything. For a moment, the leader wasn't sure. What was she supposed to say? The noise was clearly still there, but there was nothing here and they had to continue cleaning the room. Should she ask the chief? Or just make a decision right now? In the end, she decided to just keep doing her job, and possibly come back to this position later. "We're continuing the clear," she announced, and quickly her team began stacking up into the roll formation. But something gave her pause. The noise changed, drastically so. Gone was the noise of someone suppressing their violent breathing, and here was the high, erratic chattering of a primate, interrupted by loud and uncontrolled breathing. It was haunting, as it was a lot like the sounds they had heard other primates make in amusement. However, this had an air of desperation to it, like whoever was making it was fighting back against the impulse, almost as if it was causing them physical pain. Immediately, the team leader knew she wasn't the only one whose entire skin began to shiver and crawl at the grisly sound. It was now loud enough to be heard throughout the entire room. Her entire team had frozen in place, and she imagined that it probably wasn't much different for the other teams either. However, nobody, not one of them, had it worse than her, because with the raise in volume also came clarity to the noise. With that clarity also came the ability to, finally, locate the direction the sound was coming from. Maybe it was an oversight. Perhaps it was a mistake. It didn't really matter. All they knew, at that moment, is that it had happened. In their search for a target much smaller than them, they had searched for even the smallest of hideaways he could have used, unlikely as they may have been. However, in their search for a dwarf, each of the giants had neglected one, ever so simple thing: looking up. Now that he had given his position away, all eyes shot up towards him, of course. "Contact!" the team leader managed to yell out as she raised her weapon. However, she was quickly blinded by a sudden bright light from above. It wasn't bright enough to completely blind her, but the glare was enough to momentarily bedazzle her view. The figure, that was presumably the second target, let out a loud shout that sounded like it was probably an expletive in a strange unknown language. Then, all the while still wildly chattering, the primate suddenly dropped down from his raised position, right onto the team leader. It was a good thing his intentions were apparently not murderous, otherwise this little blunder could have possibly cost the lives of her entire team. However, that was not something that could be on her mind right now, as all she could do for the moment was scream out in surprise as the man landed right on her, weighing a lot more than his small frame would lead to assume, and holding on tight to her head and face as she thrashed around trying to get him off. Of course, her team was immediately ready to assist her, however the target wouldn't make it easy for them.
None of them had yet gotten the good look of them, which soon came to a big detriment to them, as that meant they hadn't noticed what he was carrying beside the small, light-emitting device in his hand. As the sole teammate to the right of his leader prepared to take aim at the attacker, said attacker suddenly shot around and hurled something large and presumably heavy, based on the sudden weight seemingly lifted off the leader's shoulders at the man. The missing gas cartridge flew through the air like it was nothing more than a paperweight, and the guard had no time to get out of his way, being hit hard with the weighty projectile and knocked back a few steps. At the same time, the attacker let himself fall to the same side he had thrown the thing, putting the team leader's head in that direction and making her lose her balance. She had to heavily lean in that direction to compensate, robbing her remaining teammates of any safe shots they could have taken. All the while, he still constantly made that terrifying, crazed noise. By now, she had regained her nerves again to the point she could reach up and try to get him off of her, but he was already making his next move as she did. She could feel the slender appendages of his small hands trying to dig between her face and her mask, ripping at the safeguard between her and the noxious environment with extreme force. However, he had miscalculated, as she could suddenly feel him seize up. The team member he had tried to take out with the cartridge had recuperated quicker than he had anticipated, and managed to get it with a well-aimed taser shot. Even though he didn't drop on the spot, as was usually the case with a direct hit, he didn't manage to cling to her head anymore, as his muscles cramped. With a strong jolt, the team leader now finally managed to fling him off, but it was already too late. He might have been flung off of her, but he wasn't going alone. And that much was clear. As a momentary jolt of pain enveloped her face, her vision suddenly went dark, and the air started tasting strangely sweet. Almost immediately, her lips and tongue were starting to feel numb. This was bad. She had to take a moment to get used to the dim light now providing her only source of vision, as she shot around and raised her canister of chemical spray, determined to at least get her shot out before succumbing to the numbing gas she was now exposed to. But in a true Deathworlder fashion, her attacker had wasted no time, even after heavily hitting the ground and being electrocuted. He had immediately gotten back up, somehow managed to ignore the current flowing through his body, ripped the electrodes out of his skin, and had already managed to get behind the man that had shot him. The two were now locked in a similar struggle as she had had with the target before, and try as she might, she couldn't get a clear shot as the primate used her colleague like a climbing frame. Of course her colleague would be protected from the chemicals by his own protective equipment, at least for the moment. However, with the target moving erratically like this, and being partially obscured by the much larger target, she would probably just waste her shot. She would have to get closer, and quickly, because it didn't look like her teammate was going to win that struggle, especially with the constant, manic cackling of their target. She took a step closer, and already she felt her knees getting weak. The can of spray felt heavy as a sack of bricks in her hand, but she had to push forward. And she wasn't the only one. Her other teammates weren't slacking off either, already being on their way to help their colleague out. What the team leader didn't expect was just how quickly the others would pass her. They moved so fast. Or was she moving slow? It didn't matter. All she had to do was get this shot off. The chemical stuff worked. She would just have to get the shot off. Why was that guy still standing? And he breathed this stuff the whole time? Wasn't it supposed to knock him out? Goodness, this stuff was strong. She was really getting woozy now. No matter. She had to get this shot off. Was it getting dark again? Team 1's team leader saw Team 2's leader hit the ground, as he and his team ready to approach and support their colleagues. In the meantime, their target was already successful, ripping another protective mask off another guard's face. Those teammates of his, that felt extraordinarily confident in their ability, started to open fire with less lethal ballistics, a few which actually hit their mark. But to his less than surprise, the projectiles impacted, transferred the momentum, and fell to the ground with barely a visible effect on the primate. It didn't even stop him from laughing like a madman, even though some of the shots looked like they must have hurt, no matter who you are. By now, one of the guards at the scene was unleashing a considerable douse of chemical weaponry, as far as they knew the best weapon they had against him, at the target, who managed to somewhat shield his face with his arm, which surely didn't protect him completely from the residual mist the attack would leave behind. His movements, and especially his reactions, were near lightning fast, as it seemed that he reacted to the attack before it had even begun, but even if that was the case, there was a certain sluggishness to them that was hard to describe. As if there was a gracious movement buried somewhere under the brutish flail. So it seemed that the gas was indeed working on the high-class Deathworlder, just a lot slower than they had expected. They would have to buy time. Still, with his small frame, considerable strength, and undeniable athleticism, any attempts the guard made at getting a hold of him failed, some of them even threatening to backfire horribly, as it seemed he was only waiting for an opportunity to latch onto his much bigger opponents, to wrestle them in a similar manner as he had done with their two colleagues. For the moment, the target appeared dazed by the chemical assault on his senses. To the horror of Team 1's leader, however, it soon became clear that that wasn't necessarily a good thing, since it took a certain amount of control from the powerful being, who still felt the need to defend himself. In a single burst, The primate closed the gap between himself and the guard, jumping and swinging his arms wildly at the position he last saw the weapon in, his movements and actions seemingly becoming less refined by the movement. A loud outcry of pain, muffled by the protective mask the guard wore, could be heard, as a slightly clumsy but still blindly fast attack made contact with his arm and knocked it aside along with a bottle of chemical spray. It became increasingly clear that they would have to get in there to provide direct support, and they would have to be fast, before the guy decided that it was time to pull his gun. Despite the intel that he was armed and dangerous, it was remarkably clear that there was no murderous intention on the alleged terrorist's part. Otherwise the team leader would have had no qualms about disregarding his orders and shooting him on the spot. Hopefully it would remain that way, as long as they returned that kindness, something that the team leader would be all too willing to do. The primate may have fought like he emerged from the darkest pits below, but he had his limit, and they were starting to show. It seemed that this way, suffering would be kept to a minimum. The hostages were out of danger, and the man was on his last legs without seriously threatening anybody. "Stop wasting ammo and move it!" the team leader now loudly commanded, trying to spur his team into motion. General sounds of agreement and motivation erupted from his teammates, as they got ready to storm forward and assist their struggling colleagues. However, their battle cry was interrupted by a truly deafening bang behind them. One they were all too familiar with. A shot. Luckily, none of them went down, and the crashing impact against the ceiling above them told of a shot fired into the air. However, that was still more than enough to petrify each of them in their place, not daring to move another muscle. From the direction of the shot, a strange, terrifying voice, that sounded like loudspeakers were projecting it right behind them, emerged, its volume overpowering everything else, even the manic cackling of the primate. "I wouldn't recommend it," it said coldly, the amplified sound carrying the wave of artificiality with it that made the team's blood freeze. "Now, put down your weapons, and I'm warning you, don't try anything stupid. I have a nervous trigger finger, and I've had a very long day, so don't expect me to be as nice as James is." First, the sudden outburst of commotion, and now the shot ringing throughout the room had given Team 3 pause. With hot shots having been fired, the situation had now changed. Everyone knew that. Team 3 dropped their less lethal weapons and instead drew their firearms. The shot had come from the entrance, so they would have to focus their attention there, although the struggle between the remainders of Team 2 and the second target were also still going on. But if both targets were within vision, who had fired that shot? Had Intel missed another accomplice? The Chief saw Team 1 being forced to drop their gear, the weapons clattering to the floor loudly as they raised their arms. Seeing his men and women much rather subdued than shot, he couldn't deny feeling a twinge of gladness, even though that might have been considered unprofessional. From the far side of the room, the primate's strange chattering was interrupted by unintelligible shouting, and presumably cursing on his side. A sideways glance in Team 2's direction confirmed the Chief's gravest suspicions, although he was clearly unsteady on his feet, and seemingly needed a moment of recuperation after the sheer amount of punishment he had taken in the battle. Somehow the primate had actually managed to emerge as the victor of the altercation. Not that he had actually done much damage himself. He merely removed the guard's protection, letting the noxious gas that was also eating away at himself do the work for him. It was strange to think that the hellish primate, that had just taken down an entire team, albeit with the element of surprise, was currently the lesser of their concerns. "You're outnumbered," the chief professionally yelled out, snapping his attention back to the new, unknown attacker. "Put down your weapon and identify yourself." An entire team's worth of firepower was pointed in the direction of the shooter. However, unluckily, the space between them and their target was occupied by Team 1, who were now basically held at gunpoint from forward and behind. From the other side of the room, the second target again made his presence known, as his chattering returned, although it sounded different this time. It sounded less strained, less painful, as if he wasn't fighting it anymore. More genuine in a way. "I think I know who that is," he loudly announced, using understandable language this time, although the inebriation from the gas was clearly audible in his voice. Having seemingly finished ridding his eyes and face of an acceptable amount of the chemical assault from earlier, he started to, with difficulty, walk across the room, seemingly without any fear of any of the deadly firearms involved. "Freeze! Don't move!" one of the chief's teammates yelled out, pointing his gun over towards the primate. They couldn't just let him walk out of there. Team 3's attention now had to be split between the target and the unseen threat, not to mention the danger to the lives of their colleagues. They'd gone caught in the standoff. Another loud bang rang out, causing the entirety of Team 3 to flinch in shock and freeze in horror. That hadn't come from the shooter. They had come from behind. Luckily, another loud collision between a heavy round of the room's ceiling indicated another warning shot. "Drop it!" a deep, raspy voice said from outside of their vision, and the sound of a lot more weight shifting and large claws scratching across the metal floor came from the same direction. The chief didn't dare turn to look at the Colossus, who was clearly not quite as restrained as they had thought, and even less knocked out by the gas. Instead, he stared straight forward, where the primate now apparently felt assured enough to also reach for his gun, seemingly very confident that they would not try to stop him by shooting. His laughter died down to the point of a barely restrained giggle again. He said, "Put down your weapons." He refrained from actually lifting his gun, instead just holding it. Instead he lifted his other hand, still holding the device emitting a faint bit of light, directing the beam on Team 3 and then on the hostages still laying behind them. "Those people need help, and quick," he explained, and it was obvious how much he struggled to sound calm and collected, despite his body trying to throw him into another laughing fit. "Laughing gas in closed rooms is dangerous. You seem to be decent enough people, so please, put away your weapons, we'll be out of your way so you can concentrate on getting them out of here." He was just letting them go? Not only them, but the hostages as well? Of course, it would be absolutely irresponsible to just let him go. Chances were, he would just take new hostages as soon as they would let him go. However, two things were clear to the chief. First, in their position, this would be the best deal they could possibly hope for. He saw absolutely no way to get anything better out of this. And second, whatever it was these people wanted, bloodshed was very obviously not part of it. The chief's mind would never even think of delving into insubordination. However, this one time, he was willing to fall back onto a technicality. After all, the mission briefing had been quite clear in one thing. The safety of the hostages is the top priority. "Put down your weapons," he ordered, leading by example by dropping his firearm and immediately kicking it out of his own reach. The safety of the civilians is what matters first and foremost. Without hesitation, his team followed his lead, the clattering and skittering of their guns loudly filling the room. At the command of the unseen third accomplice, Team 1 now started walking through the room in order to join up with Team 3, while the Prajschet, with his arms still restrained but holding the gun in one of the large maulers on his legs, along with the primate, joined their accomplice at the exit of the room. Quickly they disappeared, leaving the dishevelled and shaken security team to their own devices in the dark, hazy room. "Please don't make me regret this," the chief thought to himself, not knowing if he meant the man or his own conscience.